It was the kind of January cold that makes your breath freeze before you can see it. The kind of cold that settles into your bones, like grief. I remember standing on the back porch of our old farmhouse in southern Iowa, watching the trees sway, bare against a gray sky, waiting for a sound that would never come, my father's boots, crunching on the gravel driveway. We lived simple. Dad was a high school teacher, American history, mostly, and he worked the family land on weekends. He wasn't flashy, didn't believe in credit cards or fancy vacations. He believed in waking up early, shaking a man's hand firmly, and never leaving a job half done. Most people in town knew him as Mr. Hank Williams, not the country singer. He'd always joke, but the one who showed up to every football game, ran the 4th of July parade committee, and stayed late to help students who couldn't pass their finals. To me, he was just Dad. The guy who fixed up my first bike using spare tractor parts, who made pancakes shaped like animals every Sunday, who whistled when he worked and always smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice. He started getting tired sometime in October. First, he'd nod off after dinner. Then, he'd stop going into town on Saturdays. Mum thought it was stress midterms at school, maybe the hay harvest wearing him down. But I knew something was wrong the day he couldn't lift the feed sack onto the truck. He looked ... smaller, like something inside him was quietly giving out. The diagnosis came fast. Too fast. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, the kind with the outdated magazines and the humming fluorescent lights. Mom gripped my hand so tight her knuckles went white. Dad just nodded, like the news didn't surprise him. Maybe it didn't. They gave him 6 months. He made it 4. I was only 16. Junior year. At an age when most kids are worried about prom or SATs, I was learning how to fold hospice paperwork and memorize morphine schedules. Our house slowly turned into a hospital. The recliner became his bed. The kitchen counter was covered in pill bottles and insurance forms. Every beep from the monitor felt like a countdown. Still, he never complained. Not once. Even when the pain got so bad he couldn't stand. Even when the chemo left him shaking and cold. He still tried to help me with schoolwork, still asked about my day. He'd sit wrapped in an old quilt, lips pale and cracked, and say, "Tell me something good, kiddo, anything," and I'd make something up. Because the truth that I was scared all the time wasn't what he needed. His last week, the snow came heavy. He asked to see the old maple out back one more time. So we wheeled his chair to the window, and he stared at it in silence, like he was remembering something only he could see. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "Make sure your mother remembers how to laugh." That was Dad. Still thinking about us. Still giving us instructions for how to live, even as he was dying. He passed away quietly, in the early hours of a Thursday morning. It was supposed to be a chilly night. That's what we always did when it snowed. But instead of steam rising from the stove, there was just silence and the weight of absence hanging in the corners of every room. They say grief comes in waves. But that's not quite right. It's more like fog. It settles in and makes the familiar feel foreign. I kept expecting him to come in, to turn on the radio to that old country station, to holler from the garage that he needed my help with something. But the house stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that hurts. The funeral was small. Just family and a few close neighbors. He wouldn't have wanted anything big. I remember the minister saying he'd lived a good life, a full life, but 16 years with your father doesn't feel full when you know he'll never see you graduate, never walk you down the aisle, never hold your future children. It feels stolen. Mom tried to stay strong. She wore black for weeks, refused to let me take down his jacket from the hook by the door. But something in her changed. Not immediately. It came slowly, like a window cracking under pressure. She stopped cooking and started sleeping late. The spark that used to light up her face when Dad teased her at the dinner table, it vanished. She became someone else. Someone I didn't recognize at first. I tried to fill in the space Dad left behind. I chopped the firewood, paid the electric bill, drove her to the store. I told myself it was just a phase. That grief was a tunnel and we just had to keep walking through. But the tunnel kept getting darker. And Mom ... She started looking for exits. That was when Richard came into the picture. A man with cufflinks and a Cadillac. A friend of a friend. Someone who owned 3 car dealerships and liked to talk about golf. He brought wine and expensive cheese and laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. I didn't understand how someone like my mom, who once said love meant showing up every day, could fall for a man who looked like he belonged in a commercial. But maybe that's what grief does. It makes you chase anything that feels like light. They started going on trips. First to Kansas City, then to Phoenix, then somewhere in Mexico. I stopped asking questions. I just started spending more time in my room, surrounded by boxes of Dad's old things. I read his college essays, listened to the mixtapes he made when he was young. I held onto those pieces like they were anchors. The announcement came on a Sunday morning. Mom, standing at the foot of my bed, wearing a new dress and red lipstick. "Richard and I are getting married," she said. Just like that. Like it was. Weather. And then came the second sentence, the one that hit harder than all the rest. "We're moving to Cedar Rapids. But you'll be staying with your aunt in Lincoln." I blinked at her. "Why?" I asked. She just smiled, the way you do when you're trying to convince someone of something they won't like. "It's just easier," she said. "A fresh start for everyone." But everyone didn't include me. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when she left. Not even when she stopped answering my texts. The tears came later, in a bedroom that wasn't mine, under sheets that didn't smell like home, listening to my cousins laughing in the next room while I stared at the ceiling, wondering how quickly a person could become invisible. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just lost my father. I was losing everything, and I hadn't even begun to fight yet. The first thing I noticed about Aunt Margie's house was how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that hums beneath tension. The walls were pale blue, spotless, with polished wood floors that creaked only when I walked on them, like even the house wasn't ready to make room for me. There were no photos of me or my dad, just smiling portraits of her own kids in matching sweaters, posed beside lakes or in front of ski lodges I'd never seen. When Mom told me I'd be staying with Aunt Margie, she made it sound like a summer camp. "She has a lovely guest room," she said, "and the kids will love having you there." But the moment I stepped into the foyer, suitcase in hand, I saw it in her eyes. Margie hadn't volunteered. She'd been drafted. Her husband, Roger, barely looked up from his phone. My cousins, Grant and Leela, gave me nods that didn't reach their eyes. I knew them as the kids who used to send Christmas cards with monogrammed envelopes and carefully coordinated outfits. We hadn't really seen each other in years. Not since they stopped visiting our house. Once the gravel road messed up their SUVs. I was given a room in the basement. "It stays cool in the summer," Aunt Margie said. The window was no bigger than a shoebox, and the walls were cement with a thin coat of beige paint. The mattress sagged in the middle, and there was a faint smell of mildew near the corner. But I didn't complain, because complaining felt useless. Like sending a letter to someone who'd moved without leaving an address. Mom called once that first week, told me to settle in and be strong and remember that she loved me. She sounded rushed, distracted, like she was reading off a script she didn't believe. After that, it was mostly silence. A birthday card came in, February, with no return address. A $20 bill folded inside. Nothing more. Like that was enough to say, "I remember you." Meanwhile, she was reinventing herself in Cedar Rapids with Richard Bias. I started seeing them online, smiling at charity fundraisers, sipping champagne on rooftop patios, dancing at a gala for a foundation I'd never heard of. My father's old Chevy had barely made it through the winter, and here she was, stepping out of town cars, in designer heels. She stopped using our last name, said it didn't fit the new branding. She even archived old photos of Dad and me from her Facebook profile, said it was too painful to look at. But I knew better. We didn't match the image she wanted now. At Aunt Marge's, it didn't take long to feel like a tenant, not family. There was a list of chores on the fridge with my name penciled in at the bottom. I wasn't asked if I wanted to join family dinners. I was expected to help clean up afterward. Lila made sure I knew which bathroom was off limits. And Grant pretended not to know my name when his friends came over. They talked about me in third person, as if I were a ghost living in the walls. The rent came next. Aunt Margie knocked on my door one Saturday morning, holding a printed spreadsheet. "We've decided," she said with a tone that didn't allow room for reply, "that it's only fair you contribute. You're not a child anymore." I was 17. She charged me $200 a month, said it was character building. I didn't even have a job yet. My school lunch account was already in the negative. I asked if Mum knew about this. She said she'd spoken to her. She agrees it's time you learn responsibility. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the low ceiling above my bed, counting water stains in the drywall. I tried to picture Mom's face, not the one at the fundraisers, but the one from before, when we used to dance in the kitchen while dinner cooked. When she used to kiss my forehead and whisper, "You're my whole world." I wondered where that woman had gone. I think that's when the second kind of grief settled in. The first grief was losing my dad, the quiet, slow heartbreak of watching a good man disappear piece by piece. But the second grief, that was different. That was being left behind by the one person who was supposed to stay. The one who chose to forget me. Well, she toasted champagne and rebranded herself. I was walking 3 miles in the snow to school because I couldn't afford gas, washing my clothes at the laundromat 2 towns over because Aunt Margie said her machine was too new to risk damaging. I stopped asking for help. I stopped speaking unless I had to. Because every time I did, I felt smaller. Like the sound of my voice reminded everyone I was still there, and they didn't know what to do with that. By the spring, I had 2 jobs. A gas station by the highway that paid in checks, so small they felt insulting, and an overnight shift at a 24-hour laundromat, where the heating only worked when the manager remembered to kick the furnace. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd save up, finish school, get out, that maybe one day Mum would call and apologize, that she'd say she was wrong, that she missed me, that she wanted me to come home. But that call never came. Instead, I got another birthday card. The next year, no return address, no message, just a crisp $20 bill, folded in half. By then, I was already sleeping in my car. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you've ever gone through something like this, leave a comment below. We read every word. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that speak to the heart. The basement had no insulation. Just a single vent in the corner that rattled when the furnace kicked on, blowing more noise than warmth. I used to lie awake at night under a pile of old quilts, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, wondering if this was what being unwanted felt like, not loud or angry, just cold. Cold in the bones. Cold in the spaces between words. Cold in the way people looked past you like you were furniture someone forgot to move. Aunt Margie's house wasn't cruel. Exactly, it was too proper for that. Everything in it was polished and quiet, with matching curtains and decorative bowls of pine cones that served no real purpose. But under all that Midwestern charm, it had rules. Rules that weren't written down but lived in the pauses between sentences. In the way she said my name like it was a burden. I quickly learned not to sit in the good armchair. That was Roger's spot, even when he wasn't home. I learned not to take the last cookie, not to use more than one towel, not to shower too late at night, because hot water isn't free. Leela left sticky notes on the fridge with little reminders, like don't eat my yogurt and keep your hands off my stuff. Grant stopped speaking to me entirely after I accidentally used his toothpaste. That was apparently a boundary. Their house had 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a heated garage. But somehow there wasn't space for me to feel like I belonged. I started shrinking without even realizing it. I stopped turning on music in my room, stopped calling old friends. When teachers asked me why I looked tired, I just smiled and said I was adjusting. But the truth was, adjusting felt like suffocating slowly in a place where no one noticed if you disappeared. One afternoon, I came home from school to find a note on my mattress. Please vacate the dresser. We need the storage. Underneath it, all my clothes were in a trash bag, dumped on the floor. My aunt didn't even come downstairs to tell me herself. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bag. Something about that moment made it feel final, like a line had been drawn. But I didn't say anything. I just folded my clothes, put them in the cardboard boxes I'd never unpacked, and told myself this was just temporary, that all I had to do was survive a little longer. That's when the rent went up. Aunt Margie came down with a yellow legal pad, and her reading glasses halfway down her nose, like she was about to conduct a performance review. With heating costs this winter, she said, we've decided to increase your contribution to $300 a month. She said we, but Roger was upstairs watching golf, and I hadn't seen him speak more than 6 words to me in weeks. I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat, and said, okay, because that's what you say when you don't have options. I picked up extra shifts at the gas station, started staying later at the laundromat. When Jerry, the owner, needed someone to cover nights, it wasn't enough. Not with school supplies, bus passes, laundry detergent. I started skipping lunch at school, pocketing what little I could. Every dollar had to stretch like elastic. My cousins noticed. Not in a helpful way. Lila made a comment one morning about how some people just don't take care of themselves, eyeing the threadbare coat I'd picked up from the donation bin behind the church. She and her friends laughed as they climbed into her boyfriend's Jeep. The one with heated seats and Bluetooth speakers blasting music I hadn't heard since my world got small. Grant was worse. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. He started accidentally knocking over my backpack in the hallway. Left the basement door open in the dead of winter so the cold would sink deeper into my room. One night I came home and found my toothbrush in the toilet. No one admitted anything. No one had to. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was stronger than they were, that Dad would have told me to stand tall and keep moving. But even the strongest trees crack under enough frost. There was one night the pipes in the basement started rattling, and I knew it meant the hot water line was about to freeze. I ran upstairs to tell Aunt Margie, half panicked, thinking she'd care that her house was in danger. But when I knocked on her door, she opened it just a crack and said, "Can it wait until morning?" I stared at her, shivering in my pajamas. She stared back, not unkind, just distant, like I was a stranger at her doorstep. That's when I realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud until then. I didn't live in that house. I existed in it. I wasn't part of their family. I was a tenant in a space they didn't want to share. A ghost of someone else's responsibility, left behind like a coat nobody claimed or the lost and found. And still, despite the bruises pride took, despite the chill in the walls, and the colder looks from across the dinner table, I held on. Because deep down, I believed in the promise Dad made to me the night before he died. "Keep going," he said. "Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." So I did. Every morning I got up before the sun, caught the city bus in the dark, and went to school with my head down, and my heart wrapped in duct tape. I studied, I worked, I saved every crumpled dollar bill I could hide from sight. Because I knew I wouldn't be in that basement forever. I knew I'd have to leave that cold house before it froze the rest of me too. And when the time came, I did exactly that. I packed my life into the back seat of my dad's old Chevy, and I disappeared into the night. I remember the first night I worked a double. It was late October, and the wind had started whispering that winter was coming. The air had that dry, brittle feel, like the whole world could crack if you pushed it too hard. I had just finished a 6-hour shift at the gas station off Highway 30 Harper's, the kind of place with a flickering open sign and coffee that tastes like burnt toast stand. I caught the city bus straight to the laundromat on 12th and Maple. The job at Harper's had fallen into my lap. Through a classmate who quit after 2 weeks. "You'll hate it," she said. She wasn't wrong. The hours were brutal. The fluorescent lights made my eyes buzz, and the regulars weren't exactly warm. I got yelled at for being out of Marlboro Reds, accused of shortchanging someone over 12 cents, and had to mop up a spilled big gulp that smelled like blue raspberry and regret. But it was money, and at 17, money meant survival. My second job was at the Soap Stop, a 24-hour laundromat, wedged between a pawn shop and a payday loan center. It was the kind of place most people avoided unless they had no other choice. The owner, Jerry, was a gruff old man who smelled like motor oil and always had a toothpick in his mouth. He hired me because I didn't flinch when he asked if I could work the graveyard shift. I told him I didn't need breaks, didn't mind cleaning, and wouldn't steal from the till. That was good enough for him. From midnight to 6 a.m., I cleaned out lint traps, restocked detergent dispensers, and learned how to unjam coin slots with a butter knife. I saw all kinds of people, truckers passing through, parents washing bedding at 2 a.m. because their toddler got sick, people who weren't quite homeless but weren't far off. There was one man, Pete, who came in most nights just to stay warm. He'd tell stories, some real, most probably not, and always left the folding table spotless. One night, as I was wiping down a dryer, he looked at me and said, "Kid, you're living life on expert mode." I laughed, but he wasn't joking. But between both jobs, I worked 12 to 14 hours, most days. That left maybe 5 hours to sleep on, a good night and a few scraps of energy to attend school during the day. My classes became a blur of half-completed homework and blurry-eyed nods. I sat in the back, always near the radiator, because it was the warmest spot. Teachers asked if I was okay. I said yes. I wasn't. There were moments I nearly gave in. Days when my hands were so cracked from cold water and cheap gloves that I bled through my math worksheets. Nights when I'd fall asleep on the floor of the break room, forehead pressed to my backpack, only to wake up with a sore neck and a reminder that I still had to catch the 7:10 bus to school. But giving up wasn't an option. Not because I had some grand plan, but because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I was saving. Every tip, every paycheck, every forgotten quarter I found under vending machines, stuffed into a hollowed-out teddy bear I kept hidden under the basement stairs. My goal was simple: save enough to pay for my first semester at Hawthorne Community College. It wasn't fancy, but it was something. A way out. A way forward. When I wasn't working or pretending to function at school, I was studying at the public library. It was warm, quiet, and smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. I'd sit near the window with a stack of books, trying to keep my eyes open long enough to understand basic economics or diagram a sentence. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even hopeful most days. It just was. And still, somehow, I kept going. There's a kind of resilience that doesn't come from courage or confidence. It comes from necessity. From knowing no one's coming to save you. From realizing the only path forward is the one you dig out with your own hands. The people at school didn't know. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Leela had made sure of that, spread whispers about me working 2 jobs. Made jokes in the hallway about my clothes, my shoes, how I smelled like detergent. Once, someone left a roll of quarters on my desk during English class. No note, just quarters. I stared at them for a full minute before slipping them into my bag. I was becoming invisible and hypervisible at the same time. No one wanted to see the truth of it, but everyone wanted a good story. Some even followed me to the laundromat once, giggling outside the windows as I scrubbed a dryer door. I pretended not to notice. That was the only power I had left: silence. But late at night, while sweeping the floor and listening to the hum of machines, I started to dream again. Not of riches or revenge, just peace. A bed in a room that was mine. A hot meal I didn't have to share. A place where I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. That's what the jobs were buying. Me, not just tuition, but dignity. And it was working. Slowly, painfully, it was working. Until one day I came home to find my room in shambles. The bear I had hidden my savings in was torn open. The cash, nearly $800, was gone. My textbooks were scattered. My dresser drawers emptied. Aunt Margie said Lila had been cleaning, said it was a misunderstanding. I knew better. That night, sitting on the basement floor with the stuffing from that bear still scattered like snow, I made a decision. This wasn't survival anymore. This was erasure, and if I didn't leave, I'd disappear entirely. So I packed my things into a duffel bag, climbed into the front seat of my dad's old Chevy, and drove into the dark. Not to escape, but to begin. Because 2 jobs and 1 dream only work if you believe you're building toward something, and I still believed, even if I had to sleep in a parking lot to prove it. It's strange how quickly a car can become a home. Not in the cozy, sentimental sense, but in the survival sense. In the way an animal curls into a hollow log just to make it through the night. I never thought I'd know which windows fog up first, or how to wedge a pillow between the driver's seat and the door to block the draft. But you learned fast when the air outside could kill you and the air inside isn't much warmer. My dad's old Chevy Impala was rusted around the wheel wells and made a whining noise when I turned left. The heat worked sometimes, but only if I kicked the dashboard just right. The back seat was covered in faded blue blankets I'd borrowed from the lost and found at the laundromat. My backpack became my pillow, and a pair of thick socks wrapped in a hoodie became my heater. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe, but it was mine. And no one could raise the rent on it. I parked behind the soap stop most nights. Jerry had given me a copy of the keys years ago, back when I started. In case of emergencies, he said. I guess sleeping in a car in the dead of winter counted. I'd let myself into the employee bathroom around 3 a.m. to wash up, brush my teeth, re-braid my hair. Then I'd sneak back outside before the morning manager showed up. If I was lucky, I could get 3, maybe 4 hours of sleep between shifts, curled up under the flickering glow of the laundromat sign. No one at school knew, or at least, they didn't ask. I kept my grades as high as I could, but my homework started showing signs of wear: pages wrinkled from the condensation, corners smudged with soap, ink that ran from melted frost. One of my teachers handed back an assignment with a frown. Try to keep your papers neater, she said. I nodded, even as I tucked my numb fingers into my sleeves. What they didn't see was the hour before sunrise, when the car windows would glaze over with ice so thick I had to scrape the inside with an old credit card. Or the way I sat in the school library between classes just to warm up, pretending to study while praying no one asked why. I wore the same 3 outfits every week. The worst night was early January. The news said the wind chill was down to -12. I had barely enough gas to keep the engine running in short bursts. I'd run the heater for 15 minutes, then turn it off and wrap myself up like a burrito. Every part of me hurt. My toes felt like glass. My jaw ached from clenching. Around 2:30 a.m., the heater finally gave out for good. I could see my breath rising into the dark like little ghosts. And for a few minutes, I stopped trying to stay awake. I just let go. I didn't want to die, was just tired. Bone deep, tired. Tired of pretending this was temporary. Tired of believing someone would notice. That's when I heard a knock on the window. I jumped so hard, I hit my head on the ceiling. Squinted through the frost, expecting a cop, or maybe one of the neighborhood drunks. It was Uncle Ray. Not Uncle B Blood. Not really. Ray was my dad's best friend, growing up more like a godfather. A gruff, retired mechanic, with a smoker's cough, and hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded. I hadn't seen him in months. I didn't even know how he found me. He didn't say much, just motioned for me to roll down the window. I hesitated, then cracked it an inch. "You're freezing," he said. "Get in." He'd parked his truck behind me, heat blasting, thermos in hand. I followed him without thinking, like a child chasing a warm memory. Inside, the cab smelled like black coffee and grease. I took the thermos, and the warmth of it made me cry. Not the dramatic kind. Just slow, quiet tears I couldn't stop. Ray didn't press, just let me sit there, hands wrapped around the cup, until I could breathe again. Eventually, he asked, "Why didn't you call me?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe because I didn't want to be anyone's problem. Maybe because I didn't think anyone would care. He sighed and nodded. Like he understood anyway. Turns out he'd been keeping an eye on me longer than I realized. Saw me walking to the bus stop in snow. Saw the bags under my eyes. The new calluses on my hands. Said my dad would have haunted him if he hadn't checked in. That night, Ray didn't give me a lecture. He gave me space. He gave me silence. And in that silence, I realized something that should have been obvious. Even when you think no one's watching, someone might be. Sometimes, the help you're afraid to ask for has been quietly waiting on the sidelines, ready the moment you finally let it in. He didn't insist I stay with him. He knew better. What he offered was simpler. A heater that worked, a warm place to sit between shifts, and an open door if I needed it. That kind of grace, the quiet kind, was more powerful than charity. I slept in my car for 3 more weeks. After that, not because I had to, because I wasn't ready to trust that the ground beneath me wouldn't shift again. I'd been pulled out from under too many times. But each night, I slept a little easier knowing there was a truck idling nearby. I didn't tell anyone at school, not even the counselor who kept asking if things were okay at home. I just kept my head down and my focus forward. Because I still had a dream. College, a degree, a shot at something steady. Even if the road there was paved with frost. Even if it started in the backseat of a broken-down Chevy. It started with a laugh. That kind of laugh you can feel even if you can't hear it, sharp, smug, and just a little too loud. I was closing up at the soap stop one night, dragging a mop across the tile floor, when I caught a flicker of movement outside the window. At first, I thought it was a stray dog or someone waiting on laundry. But then I saw the glow of phone screens. 3 of them, teenagers, bundled in North Face jackets, filming through the glass, pointing at me as I scrubbed out a sticky patch of slush near the front counter. I tried not to react, but my hands tightened around the mop. When I looked up, I locked eyes with one of them. It was my cousin, Grant, the same cousin who used to throw water balloons at me during summer barbecues. The same cousin who once told a group of kids at school that I smelled like gas station grease and dryer sheets. Now, he was filming me. His 2 friends, boys from his private school, the kind who wear Letterman jackets like armor, were laughing as they zoomed in on my stained work apron, on the pile of blankets behind the counter, on the tired slump in my shoulders. I didn't say a word, just turned and walked to the back, holding my breath until I was out of their sight. But the damage was already done. The video went up that night. They called it Cousin Car Chronicles. A little documentary. They said, a behind-the-scenes look at the family disappointment. One of them joked in the caption. It showed my car parked in the alley, frosted windows, me brushing my teeth in the laundromat bathroom. One clip even caught me changing clothes in the back seat. Blurry, distant, but still me. Still stolen. It went viral. Not nationwide viral, enough to catch fire in the circle of privileged teens who fed on other people's pain for sport. They turned me into a punchline, a meme. A cautionary tale of what happens when you don't get into a good college. I didn't have TikTok. But it didn't matter. The next morning at school, I could feel its ties lingering to long conversations that stopped when I walked by. Someone left a toothbrush in my locker, with a sticky note that read, "Don't forget to floss. Princess of Poverty." Another student filmed me in the cafeteria and whispered loudly, "Smile for the camera, street kid." I didn't cry. Not in the hallway. Not on the bus. Not even when I found out that Leela had been liking the posts, commenting on them, laughing along with strangers while I picked up extra shifts to pay for a bus pass and a box of tampons. That hurt more than the video. The betrayal didn't come from strangers. It came from my own blood, from people who sat across from me at Thanksgiving, who hugged me out of obligation, who said things like family first while passing the gravy. Turns out, there's a special kind of humiliation reserved for when your own family uses your worst moment for entertainment. It's not just cruel, it's calculated. Cold, like they wanted the world to see what they saw when they looked at me. A burden dressed in secondhand clothes. A reminder of everything they were glad they weren't. For days, I stayed quiet. I went to work, went to school, and kept my eyes low. I became invisible again, but not in the way I'd hoped. People didn't ignore me, they saw me too clearly now. Saw the girl living in a car, working 2 jobs, too poor to fight back. And that visibility, that exposure, felt like being flayed open. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. Because one night, around 3 a.m., I noticed something strange. A black SUV parked across the street from the laundromat. Tinted windows. Engine running. Didn't move. Just sat there. I watched it for a few minutes, half expecting another group of kids trying to catch me on camera. But no one got out. No one approached. The next night, it was there again. And the night after that, always in a different spot. Always watching. At first, I was scared. I thought maybe it was a cop, or worse, someone dangerous. But after the 5th night, when the temperature dropped below 0 and the engine still idled patiently across the street, I started wondering if maybe someone knew. I didn't sleep much that week. Between the videos, the stares, the car that now felt more like a cage than a haven, and the constant hum of fear just beneath my skin, I started unraveling. The real breaking point came on a night when the heat wouldn't kick on. The laundromat was closed for repairs, and my phone had died. I'd used the last of my cash on gas, and I could feel the cold creeping in through my boots, turning my toes to stone. I wrapped myself in every blanket I had, pulled my knit cap over my ears, and tried to pretend I was anywhere else. I thought of my dad. I thought of the time we built a snow fort in the backyard and drank hot chocolate from mismatched mugs. I thought about how safe I'd felt then, how loved, how far away that version of life seemed now. And I thought, this is how people disappear. This is how you become the kind of story people whisper about after it's too late. But just when I felt myself slipping into that quiet, dangerous place where cold no longer feels cold, and exhaustion feels like peace, there was another knock on the window. Not a cop, not a teenager with a phone. It was the man from the SUV. Except it wasn't a stranger. It was Uncle Ray. Again. And this time, he didn't just ask if I was okay. He told me it was time to come inside. Time to talk. And that conversation would change everything. Because what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching me all along. Not to laugh, not to shame me, but to see what I was made of. He didn't say much at first. Just stood there beside my frost-covered window, hands buried deep in the pockets of a wool coat that probably cost more than my car. His breath rose in slow clouds, calm against the wind that had been slicing through the alley like a knife. I blinked hard, half expecting I was hallucinating, seeing things the cold had conjured in my sleep-deprived brain. But it was him, Uncle Marcus. I hadn't seen him in months, not since my dad's funeral, when he gave me a polite hug and handed my mom a sympathy card in an envelope. So thick, it looked like it contained more paperwork than sentiment. He was the successful one, the younger brother who'd made it, out of the cornfields, out of the hand-me-downs, out of the struggle, real estate mogul, golf buddy of city councilmen, the kind of man people called sir, even when they weren't sure why. Now he was standing outside my car at 2:15 in the morning, like it was perfectly normal for a teenager to be sleeping, behind a laundromat in the middle of a Midwest cold snap. I cracked the window. My hands were shaking, not just from the cold. He didn't make eye contact at first, just nodded toward the back of the laundromat. "Come inside," he said. "It's warmer in my office." I hesitated. Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't real, that people like him didn't show up for people like me, not unless it was for a holiday photo or a polite check-in once a year. But I was too cold to argue, so I followed him. Turns out, above the soap stop, behind an unmarked metal door, I had passed 100 times without noticing, was a small office, quiet, clean, and astonishingly warm. There was a desk, a beat-up leather chair, a coffee pot, and a window that overlooked the street like a watchtower. The heat hit my face like a slap. I wanted to cry, but didn't. He poured 2 mugs of coffee. No sugar, no cream, just the kind of coffee my dad used to drink, strong and a little bitter. Then he sat and he watched me. Like I was a math problem he couldn't quite solve. "I've been seeing you here," he finally said. "For weeks." My stomach twisted. I thought he meant the videos, the posts, the humiliation. I braced myself for judgment. But then he added, "I've been watching the security cameras. The ones Jerry installed before he left town." That stopped me cold. "You knew?" I asked. "I knew you were working both jobs," he said. "Knew you were sleeping in that car. Knew about the TikToks, the slurs, the slush, the nights you gave up your own dinner to buy laundry soap for strangers. I saw it all." He let that hang in the air. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or furious. He sipped his coffee, then pulled a small manila folder from a drawer. Set it on the table between us. Inside were copies of my time cards, printouts of my grades, still high, despite the sleep deprivation, screenshots of every viral post my cousins had made, even a faded photo from the laundromats, lost and found camera footage, me, asleep behind the counter, head against my arms, surrounded by dryers, humming quietly behind me like a lullaby for the worn out. "I've been watching because I made a promise," he said quietly. "To your father?" I couldn't breathe. He leaned back, eyes unreadable. "The day before your dad passed, he asked me to do 2 things. 1, look out for you, and 2, don't make it easy." That confused me. "What do you mean?" "He didn't want you handed things. He said you had to earn it, that you needed to learn how to stand on your own. But he also said—" Marcus paused, looked down at the folder. "He said to know when enough was enough." I felt my throat close. He stood then, walked to the far cabinet, and pulled out a key. Set it on the desk. "That's for the studio. Apartment upstairs. It's yours," he said. "No rent, no strings. But there are conditions. Keep your grades up. Keep working here, and don't lie to me, ever." I couldn't speak. He smiled then, the smallest, saddest smile I'd ever seen. On his face, "Your dad and we used to sleep in a van. Back when we were your age. After Mom lost the house, before we found our footing, we were nobodies with bruised knuckles and dreams too big for our shoes. The owner of this place back then, it was called Bubble Time, used to let us crash in the boiler room when it got below zero." He pulled out a photo, 2 teens huddled in front of an open dryer, a can of beans between them. One of them was my father. I recognized that grin, that goofy, full of hope look he never lost. "I bought this place when the old man passed. Built from here, block by block. Now, I own most of the buildings on this street. Your dad helped me get started. He did the books, drew up contracts on the back of napkins." He turned back to me, softer now. "And you remind me so much of him, it hurts." The room went quiet again. That night, I slept in a real bed. In a warm room. No frost on the windows. No engine humming for heat. Just silence. Safe, beautiful silence. But I knew one thing clearly, as I lay under a clean blanket and stared up at a ceiling that didn't leak. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the turning point. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just surviving. I was being watched by someone who believed I could do more than just endure. Someone who knew the road I was walking, because he'd walked it barefoot once too. The apartment above the soap stop was barely 400 square feet, 1 room. A kitchenette, a tiny bathroom with a door that didn't quite close. The linoleum floors curled at the edges, and the paint on the walls had yellowed in the corners. But, to me, it felt like stepping into a cathedral. Not because of how it looked, but because of what it meant. It was mine. That first morning, I stood barefoot in the middle of the room, staring at the sunlight creeping through the blinds, warming the tips of my toes. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without my breath fogging in the air. No engine noise. No fear of someone knocking on the window. Just stillness. Real stillness. The kind that wraps around you gently, instead of pressing down on your chest. There was a mattress on the floor, clean sheets folded in a pile beside it. A second-hand desk had been pushed against the far wall, and on top of it, a simple note in Uncle Marcus's slanted handwriting. "Don't waste this." I didn't intend to. I moved in that morning with everything I owned. 2 duffel bags, a trash bag full of blankets, my dad's toolbox, and a laundry basket stuffed with textbooks. ramen, and a photo of my parents on their wedding day. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I tucked the picture onto the corner of the desk and whispered, "We're home." That same afternoon, I started my new role, not just as the overnight attendant, but as acting manager of the laundromat. Jerry had taken an early retirement, and Uncle Marcus decided it was time someone else learned the business from the inside out. "You already do most of the work," he told me, handing over a clipboard and a ring of keys. "Now you'll do it with a title." He wasn't exaggerating. I knew the machines by sound, knew which ones needed extra coaxing to start, which dryers ran hot, which coin slot jammed if you fed it quarters too quickly. I had learned to fix more with duct tape and WD-40 than most techs could with a toolbox. But now, I learned the books. Marcus started coming in twice a week to show me the real work, the numbers behind the soap bubbles. Utility costs, profit margins, insurance policies, vendor contracts. He brought printed spreadsheets, red pens, and a patience I didn't expect from a man who built a small empire, brick by brick. We worked upstairs, in his office overlooking the street, sipping coffee from chipped mugs as he taught me how to read between the lines of a ledger. "This isn't just a laundromat," he said one evening. "It's a case study in survival. These machines are just the start. What you learn here, this math, this grit, it transfers to anything you want to build." He started taking me on walks through the neighborhood, pointing out buildings he owned. The bodega on the corner, the small cafe that did poetry readings on Fridays, even the old hardware store that had been boarded up since I was a kid. "All of it started with this place," he said, tapping the laundromat window. "And now, you're part of it." For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel seen. I felt trusted, and something shifted in me. I started waking up earlier, staying later. I kept a notebook in my pocket, jotting down ideas, better ways to organize supplies, a more efficient washer rotation schedule, a plan to fix the industrial dryer that kept shorting out. I even made flyers offering a free wash day once a month for low-income families. Marcus didn't blink. He just said, "Let's try it." Word got around fast. Customers started learning my name. One woman brought me a plate of cookies after I helped her fix her jammed machine. A father with 3 kids left a thank you note after I lent him quarters to finish his load. The regulars began to nod when they walked in, some of them even smiling. I wasn't the girl in the shadows anymore. I was part of something. Even the kids who had mocked me online started quieting down. One day, I caught Grant at the register, waiting for change. He didn't make eye contact, didn't say a word, just took the quarters and left. It felt like closure, not revenge, not victory, just closure. One night, after locking up, I sat in the office with Uncle Marcus, flipping through the ledgers we'd just balanced. He leaned back, hands behind his head, and said, "You've got your father's mind, but your own kind of fight." It meant more than he knew, because this little office above the washers and dryers, with its humming heater and crooked window blinds, had become more than just shelter. It was a beginning, a classroom, a second chance wrapped in quarters and lint. And in that quiet, modest space, I started building a future from the ground up. Not just because I wanted to prove something to the world, but because I finally believed I could. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those gray, forgettable afternoons when the sky sits too low and the air smells like rain that never arrives. I was folding towels behind the counter at the soap stop when the door burst open and Grant came rushing in, face pale, eyes wide like he'd just seen a ghost. He wasn't the smug, smirking version of himself I was used to, the kid who laughed at my uniform and filmed me while I mopped floors. This version was different, scared, rattled. "I need to talk to you," he said, breathless. Now we went into the office upstairs. He paced while I stood, arms crossed, waiting. And then, like he couldn't hold it anymore, the words spilled out of him, frantic, jumbled, like he was afraid they'd vanish if he didn't say them fast enough. He had borrowed his mom's iPad, just to play a game, he said. But when he opened it, a message popped up. A text from someone saved only as D. It read, "Everything's ready for next week. We're finally going to be free." He opened the thread. Hundreds of messages. All from Derek, my stepfather, my mom's husband, and all addressed to Aunt Margie. They weren't just messages. They were plans, wire transfers, mentions of offshore accounts, fake names, new passports. It was like reading the blueprint of a heist movie, only this one was real. And the villains were people I used to eat Christmas dinner with. Grant showed me screenshots. I scrolled through them with a sinking feeling, each text colder than the last. Move the money through the charity account. Marcus will never notice. Get the signatures before Friday. And finally, the one that made me sit down. Let the girl keep playing manager. She's just a distraction. That one was about me. They'd been watching too, only not like Marcus. Not to help, but to make sure I didn't get in the way. Grant said he didn't know what to do, that he didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he had. He knew something was off. The sudden trips his mum took, the weird fights late at night, the cash withdrawals she wouldn't explain. Now he had proof. I called Uncle Marcus. He didn't say much on the phone. Just, don't touch anything. I'm coming. When he arrived, it was like the air in the room shifted. He didn't yell, didn't panic. He sat down, read every message, every file, every transaction history. The only sign of emotion was a slight tremor in his hand as he clicked through the emails. Then he said one word: lawyer. Within 24 hours, his entire legal team had taken over. Investigators, forensic accountants, even an IT guy who looked like he lived on coffee and paranoia. They tore through records, cross-referenced accounts, tracked IP addresses, and what they found was worse than we'd imagined. Aunt Margie and Derek had been siphoning money from Marcus's businesses for almost a year. They created fake vendor companies, filed bogus maintenance requests, and rerouted funds through dummy accounts disguised as charity initiatives. They'd funneled over $900,000 into offshore banks, and were days away from pulling out the rest, another $3.4 million, set to disappear before anyone noticed. Some of that money came from trust funds, college accounts, even payroll for employees who'd never miss a direct deposit because they were too busy making ends meet, including mine. The betrayal cut deeper than numbers. They weren't just stealing from a business. They were stealing from family, from kids, from people who trusted them to keep the lights on, and worst of all, they had planned to leave without a word, disappear to another country, start over. Let the wreckage collapse behind them, while the rest of us stood in the ashes. Rebecca was the next to find out. She showed up at my door late at night, makeup streaked down her cheeks, hair tangled from crying into a pillow. She had seen the messages too. Overheard her mum on the phone. She couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. She asked if she could stay with me. I gave her the mattress. I took the floor. We didn't talk that first night. Just laid in the dark, listening to the creak of pipes and the hum of machines downstairs. Both of us trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. Over the next few days, the investigation grew. Marcus's team pulled every file, every contract, every paper Margie had ever touched. She'd always handled the books. He trusted her, said it was family tradition. That trust had cost him millions. What we didn't expect was how much. She'd also taken from her own kids. Both Grant and Rebecca's college funds gone. Maxed out credit lines in their names. Even their social security numbers used to open fake accounts. Their futures mortgaged without permission. Derek, for his part, was just as complicit. Turns out, half the yacht parties and investment trips he and my mum went on were funded with stolen money. While I was eating stale Pop-Tarts and sleeping in a car, they were ordering wine at rooftop bars in Chicago with money that wasn't theirs. And as for my mom, we weren't sure how much she knew. Not yet. That's what Marcus said when I asked. We wait, he told me. We wait, and we watch. Because how she reacts next will tell us everything. There was only one thing left to do. Catch them before they ran. And Uncle Marcus, he had a plan. He always did. It all came crashing down on the day of Grant's 18th birthday party. The irony of it wasn't lost on any of us. How the very celebration meant to usher him into adulthood would become the stage for exposing every lie, every betrayal, every dollar siphoned behind closed doors. Aunt Margie planned the whole event like a senator's fundraiser live band. White tents in the backyard, catered barbecue, even a portable photo booth. There were golf carts, shuttling guests from their cars up the driveway, and centerpieces, made of blue hydrangeas and tiny silver balloons, spelling out 18. But beneath all that sparkle, the foundation was already crumbling, and Marcus was ready to bring it all down, brick by brick. That morning, the house felt like a film set picture, perfect, but hollow. Margie floated through the rooms with a champagne flute in one hand and a Bluetooth earpiece in the other, directing the florist like a Broadway conductor. Derek arrived late, flashing that polished salesman grin, handing Grant a gift-wrapped box so large it looked ridiculous. A state-of-the-art gaming console, the kind of thing people buy when they want to look generous without being sincere. Rebecca and I stayed quiet. helping set up chairs and making small talk with guests who had no idea they were sipping punch. Just feet away from the site of a federal investigation. Marcus timed it precisely. At 3:47 p.m., a black SUV rolled up the driveway. His lawyer stepped out, followed by a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket FBI, though he didn't announce it yet. They walked straight into the house without knocking, through the back patio doors, and into the living room where Derek was telling a neighbor about his next big property flip. Aunt Margie's smile froze mid-sentence when she saw them. "Family meeting," Marcus said, calm and cold, clinking a fork against his water glass. Now, confused whispers rose around the guests. Some tried to follow. Marcus turned and shut the double doors behind us. Inside. The temperature dropped. The lawyer laid out a stack of manila folders on the coffee table. Bank statements, wire transfers, company registrations, copies of messages, pictures of Margie and Derek together at a private cabin in Michigan weekends they claimed were business retreats. And then came the audio files. Voice recordings, taken from Derek's phone, of the two of them laughing about how easy it was to fool everyone. Margie tried to speak. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Fabricated. Anyone can Photoshop." Marcus held up her iPad, the one Grant had found. "Password, your birthday," he said quietly. "You didn't even try to hide it." Then came the knock at the front door. Only this time, no one opened it from inside. 2 federal agents stepped into the room. 1. Read the charges aloud. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. It didn't sound like a TV show anymore. It sounded real. Derek looked stunned, like this wasn't the ending he expected. He opened his mouth to explain, but the agent was already turning him around, securing cuffs on his wrists. "This is a mistake," he kept saying. "I'm a businessman. You don't understand." "We understand," the agent replied. "All too well." Aunt Margie didn't say a word. Her face went blank, stone cold, jaw tight. Even as they placed her under arrest, she never looked at Grant or Rebecca. Not once, just stared at the carpet, as if she could fall through it and escape. I watched from the corner, arms crossed. Not out of revenge, but because part of me needed to witness it. Needed to see the lies become consequences. The people who made me feel invisible now, being forced into the light. Outside, the party was still going. People sipping lemonade. Kids running through the grass. Music playing. They had no idea that just feet away, the world was breaking open. When the door slammed, behind the agents, no one moved. My mom stood frozen near the fireplace, hands trembling. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, and maybe she didn't. Maybe she was seeing me for the first time, not as the girl she'd left behind, but as someone who had survived everything she'd ignored. She tried to speak. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know that we're doing this." Marcus looked at her, eyes hard. "But you didn't ask either." Later, after the agents were gone and the house had emptied, the truth came into sharper focus. Derek had drained my mother's accounts too, used her name on business filings, signed her onto loans she never read. Her trust had become another tool in his game. She sat on the front steps that night, heels kicked off, eyeliner smudged, whispering, "I lost everything." But the truth was, she'd lost it a long time ago. Not the money, but the people. The choices, the respect. Grant didn't speak for hours. Rebecca went back to the apartment with me that night, numb, silent, curled up on the mattress like a child again. She didn't cry. Neither did I. There was something deeper than tears in the silence we shared, something permanent. By the end of that week, the investigation had stretched to 6 states. More accounts were found. More lies exposed. Derek and Margie were held without bail. My mom entered a rehabilitation center not for substance abuse, but for what the professionals called trauma-driven identity disassociation. Fancy words for a woman who no longer knew who she was, or who she'd become. And Marcus, he'd never gloated. He never said, "I told you so." Instead, he showed up the next morning with breakfast sandwiches and a stack of folders. "Ready to get back to work?" he asked, sliding one across the table. Because even when the house is on fire, someone still has to rebuild, brick by brick. And I was ready. The apartment above the laundromat wasn't meant for 3 people. The water heater had a bad habit of quitting halfway through a shower. The kitchen could barely fit 2. And the old futon creaked so loudly that turning over in your sleep sounded like breaking sticks in the woods. But somehow, it became a home. Not the kind we'd grown up in, with front porches and family dinners and holiday decorations. No, This home was built on apology, resilience, and second chances. After the arrests, Grant stayed with a friend for a while, but Rebecca came straight to me. No pretense, no pride, just a knock on the door, and tear-filled eyes. She stood in the hallway with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and said, "I have nowhere else to go." She didn't ask if she could stay, she didn't have to. I cleared a space on the futon, handed her a clean towel, and told her the same thing Marcus had told me weeks earlier. Don't waste this. At first, we barely spoke. She tiptoed around, folded her laundry extra neatly, and offered to buy groceries with what little money she had left. But something shifted one morning when we found ourselves at the sink together, brushing our teeth side by side, sharing toothpaste like we'd done it all our lives. We looked at each other, mouths full of foam, and laughed. Real, shoulder shaking, tired but free laughter. Grant joined us 2 weeks later. He knocked on the door with a backpack. His shoulders slumped, and no sarcastic remark in sight. "I heard you have space," he said. I pointed to the spot on the floor where I'd been sleeping and said, "Only if you don't mind the draft." That night, we split a frozen pizza and made a pact to no more pretending. No more cruelty, no more looking back, unless we were learning from it. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. 3 broken kids, rebuilding a family from scratch. We made it work. Mornings were chaos. Rebecca hogging the bathroom mirror, Grant grumbling about how coffee isn't breakfast, me tripping over laundry baskets to find clean socks. But we learned each other's rhythms. We bought groceries together, clipped coupons, and shared everything down to shampoo and toothpaste. There were arguments over dishes, over music, over who left the window open during a snowstorm, but they passed quickly, because when you've all lost everything, you don't waste energy on grudges. Marcus started calling us the crew. He brought us into the business slowly. Rebecca worked the front desk. Turns out, she was surprisingly good with customers, warm when she wanted to be quick-witted, and disarming. People remembered her name. She kept a stash of lollipops at the register for kids and old men who liked to flirt harmlessly while their clothes dried. Grant, who once mocked me for fixing machines, became obsessed with them. He read manuals, watched tutorials, and started diagnosing problems faster than the repair guy Marcus used to call. One day, he fixed a jammed industrial washer using a spoon, a zip tie, and a shoelace. Marcus gave him a raise on the spot, and I kept the books, ran inventory, scheduled shifts, and made sure the place didn't fall apart when no one was watching. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose, a rhythm, a reason to keep pushing forward. Together, we kept the lights on, the washers running, and each other sane. It was messy, beautiful, earned, and over time, something unexpected grew between us. Trust. The same cousins who once humiliated me, who looked through me like I didn't exist, were now sitting beside me every night, passing mashed potatoes and budgeting toilet paper. They apologized not just once, but over and over, in words, in actions, in effort. And they listened when I spoke, really listened. That was new. That mattered. Rebecca would cry sometimes quietly at night, when she thought I was asleep. I never asked why. I didn't have to. Losing your mother to prison, your identity to shame, and your world to fraud leave scars that no sentence can erase. But we healed. Slowly. Together. Marcus didn't hover, but he was always there, dropping off coffee, checking on our numbers, pushing us to think bigger. "You kids aren't just running a laundromat," he'd say. "You're learning how to run your lives." He taught us about margins, investments, real estate taxes, but he also taught us about people, about paying attention, about doing business with integrity, even when it costs more. The biggest lesson, though, came when he handed me the keys to the store and said, "Take care of it like your father would've." That stopped me in my tracks, because for the first time since Dad passed, I didn't feel like a child trying to survive. I felt like a partner. We visited Dad's grave that spring. Me, Grant, and Rebecca. We stood in silence for a long time. Then each took turns telling him what we'd learned. About loyalty, about work, about what kind of people we didn't want to become. It didn't fix everything, but it gave us something we hadn't had in a long time. Closure and a new beginning. The smell of fresh laundry always reminded me of him. Not just because he did the wash every Sunday, humming along to old Johnny Cash records, but because it was the smell of order, of routine, of a life held together by the smallest acts of care. Folding towels just right, rolling socks in pairs, making sure everyone had what they needed before they even asked. That was my dad. Quiet, steady, dependable. Years later, Standing in the office above the soapstop with the early morning sun spilling across the floor, I found myself folding a delivery invoice with the same careful precision he used on laundry. A habit I hadn't noticed until that moment, and in that quiet, with the hum of dryers downstairs, and the soft scuff of my worn-out sneakers on tile, I realized something. I'd become the kind of person he hoped I would be. We'd expanded. One laundromat turned into 2, then 3. Not chains, not franchises, just small community-driven places where people felt safe, seen, and respected. We installed free detergent dispensers, started a weekly Clean Start program for unhoused families, and partnered with local schools to provide students with vouchers so they could walk into class with clean clothes and dignity. Marcus and I worked shoulder to shoulder for months, then years. He handled the big negotiations. I handled the people. I'd inherited my dad's ear for quiet details, the mother struggling with 3 bags and a toddler, the elderly man counting quarters like they were gold coins, the high school kid too proud to ask for a discount. I saw them, all of them, because I'd been them. Rebecca eventually moved out and went back to school social work. Of all things, she said it was time to stop hiding from the pain and start helping others move through theirs. Grant stayed with the business. Now he runs maintenance and operations across all 3 locations, his name stitched onto a dark blue work shirt, his pride in the job radiating from every corner of each store. Sometimes, people ask if we're siblings. We usually laugh and say, it's complicated, but in truth, it isn't. Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing each other, every day, even when it's hard. One afternoon, after payroll and inventory checks, I pulled out a battered shoebox from the back of my filing cabinet. Inside were scraps of our old life dad's flannel shirt, the photo of him and Uncle Marcus fixing up their first truck, a copy of his obituary printed on yellowing newsprint. I placed the box on the desk, opened the window, and let the spring breeze fill the room. It smelled like soap, sunshine, and something else I couldn't name. Peace. Maybe dot or possibility. Later that year, we hosted a ribbon cutting for the newest location on the edge of the same neighborhood where I used to sleep in my car. The mayor showed up. So did the local news. But the moment that mattered most came after the cameras stopped rolling, when a woman in a faded jean jacket walked up to me with 2 little girls at her side and whispered, "Thank you for making a place where we can breathe." I handed her a laundry card and smiled. "Your first month's on us," I said. "Just bring them by whenever you need." She cried. I almost did too. Because it wasn't just about clean clothes. It was about dignity, stability, belonging. All the things my father gave me without ever naming them. Before he passed, Dad once told me that life wasn't about grand gestures. It was about doing small things well consistently, kindly, with intention. He said, "You don't need to change the world. Just show up for your corner of it." So that's what I do. Every day. I open the doors, turn on the lights, and show up. For the mothers, the teenagers, the forgotten, and the hopeful. For my cousins, who became my family. For Uncle Marcus, who kept his promise. And most of all for him. Because sometimes, the greatest legacies don't come from power or fame. They come from soap, patience, and a heart that refuses to quit. From laundry to leadership. And from lost to purpose.